You've done this. Maybe last year, maybe once in your 20s, but you've done it. You walked into a casino with a number in your head. 200 bucks, 500, whatever it was, you told yourself that was the number, and when it was gone, you'd walk out and get a burger and laugh about it. And somewhere in the middle of that, a woman came by with a drink you didn't pay for. That drink is the entire business. Not the roulette wheel, not the slot machines with the movie themes. That free drink is a line item in a spreadsheet, and someone whose job title includes the word analyst knows exactly what it costs and how many extra minutes it buys. I was 23 the first time I walked onto the Las Vegas Strip. My buddy Marcus and I drove in from Phoenix in a Corolla with a check engine light that had been on since college. $300 each, and a hotel room that cost 40 bucks a night, which should have been my first clue that something weird was happening with the math. Nobody builds a $2 billion tower to rent rooms at $40. Anyway, I got hot at a blackjack table, up about 600, which at 23 felt like generational wealth. And a guy in a suit walked over, asked my name, and told me dinner was on the house. Steakhouse. Anything I wanted. I thought I'd earned it. I thought the casino was being a good sport. Took me 8 more years and a job in finance to understand what actually happened. They weren't rewarding me. They were paying to keep me in the building because the only thing that could hurt them was me walking out the door with their $600 still in my pocket. So let's talk about what a casino actually is. Not the vibes, the P&L. Start with the number everyone thinks they know, house edge. On an American roulette wheel, the one with both a 0 and a double 0, the house edge is 5.26%. That means for every $100 wagered, the casino expects to keep about $5.26 on a pass line bet in craps, 1.41%. On baccarat betting the banker, about 1.06%. On blackjack with perfect basic strategy, you can get it under 0.5%. 0.5%. That sounds like a terrible business. 0.5% doesn't build a $4 billion resort. Here's the trick, and it's the first thing that ever made me sit up straight about this industry. The casino doesn't make 5.26% of your money. It makes 5.26% of every bet you make, and you make the same bet over and over with the same chips. You buy in for 200. You bet 20 a spin. The wheel spins about 60 times an hour. That's $1,200 of action in 1 hour from a $200 buy-in. The house's expected take is 5.26% of $1,200. Not of $263 an hour, from a guy who thinks he's risking 200. Play for 4 hours and the math says you're done. Not because you got unlucky, because you stayed. The word for what actually shows up in the revenue report isn't edge, it's hold. Hold is the percentage of the money you walked in with that the casino ends up keeping. On table games, that typically runs 15 to 20%. On games with a 2% theoretical edge, the gap between 2% and 18% is not luck, it's time. I learned that from a guy named Ray Mercado. Ray ran a table games pit at a riverboat in Indiana, and I met him because my managing director told me to go talk to operations, which is what people say when they don't want to drive to Indiana themselves. 26 years on the floor. I asked him what kept him up at night, expecting something about card counters or a bad run at baccarat. He said, empty chairs. The games are fine, he said. The games always win eventually. What ruins a Tuesday is a floor with nobody on it, because a blackjack table with no players still costs him a dealer, a slice of the pit boss, surveillance, lights, carpet, and rent. That reframed everything for me. A casino isn't a gambling business. It's a capacity utilization business that happens to have a mathematically guaranteed yield on utilization. It's closer to an airline than a hedge fund. That's why the drinks are free. That's why the steak was free. That's why there are no clocks and no windows, which everybody knows, but people repeat it like it's spooky when it's really just inventory management. So where does the money actually come from? If you ask most people to picture casino revenue, they picture a card table with a guy in sunglasses. Wrong picture. At a typical regional American casino, Somewhere between 65 and 80% of gaming revenue comes from slot machines. Slots, the things your aunt plays. I found this out the embarrassing way. First gaming model I ever built, I was 26, and I spent 2 weeks on this beautiful table games module. Blackjack, craps, roulette, hold percentages by game type, seasonality, the works. My boss at the time, a woman named Priya who had this habit of reading your model in complete silence while you slowly died inside, scrolled through all of it and asked me one question. Where's your win? Per unit, per day. I had no idea what that was. Win per unit per day, WPUD. The single most important operating metric in the industry. And I'd built a 200-tab model without it. It's exactly what it sounds like. What one slot machine takes in on one day. On the strip, a couple $100. At a decent regional property, maybe 150 to 250. Now multiply. 2,000 machines at $200 a day is 400,000 a day. Call it 146 million a year. From machines. And a slot machine doesn't take a lunch break, doesn't need a dealer, and doesn't need 4 or 5 full-time employees to run around the clock the way a single blackjack table does. That's the whole reason table games have been shrinking for 30 years. A blackjack table is a labor problem with felt on it. A slot machine is a vending machine that sells hope. Priya made me rebuild it. Slots came out at 78% of the revenue line. And here's a detail almost nobody hears. Casinos frequently don't own their slot machines. A big chunk of the floor sits on participation deals, where the manufacturer, companies like IGT or Aristocrat or Light & Wonder, keeps ownership and takes a daily fee or a cut of the win. The flashy branded games with the licensed TV shows? Usually those. So the casino is renting its money printer, which tells you a lot about who really has pricing power here. Now the part that eats the revenue. Taxes. And this is where the business goes from beautiful to brutal depending on a line on a map. In Nevada, the top gaming tax is 6.75% of gross gaming revenue, the lowest in the country by a mile. In Pennsylvania, slot revenue is taxed around 54%. Same machine, same customer, same electricity bill, half the money gone before you pay a single employee. Sit with that. 2 identical casinos, identical floors, identical performance. One keeps 93 cents of every gaming dollar before costs. The other keeps 46. That's not a margin difference. That's a different asset class. It's why a casino's revenue number tells you almost nothing about whether it's a good business. Macau runs around 40%. New York has been running a downstate licensing process where the license fee alone starts at $500 million before you lay a single brick. Which points at the thing that actually makes these valuable, and it isn't the gambling. It's that you can't just open one. Limited licenses mean limited supply, and limited supply in a business with a guaranteed gross margin is a government-issued moat. That's the good news. Here's the bad news, and it's where a lot of very smart people have lost extraordinary amounts of money. In 2015, I was in Atlantic City for a conference, and on the second day, I walked up the boardwalk to look at the Revel. The Revel cost about $2.5 billion. 47 stories of glass, genuinely beautiful. Opened in 2012, went bankrupt twice, closed in September 2014. 2 years. In 2015, it sold for $82 million. $2.5 billion in, $82 million out, roughly 3 cents on the dollar. I stood there, on a gray afternoon, looking up at this enormous dark building with nobody in it, and the feeling wasn't excitement about a distressed asset. It was closer to vertigo. Somebody sat in a room and modeled that. Somebody built a spreadsheet that said, "This works," and they were wrong by $2.5 billion. 4 Atlantic City casinos closed in 2014 alone. The market didn't shrink because people stopped gambling. It shrank because Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, and New York opened their own. When your business model is people drive here, somebody building a closer one is an extinction event. The house always wins is true at the table. It is absolutely not true at the corporate level. So how did the industry fix it? They did something I think is one of the most interesting pieces of financial engineering of the last decade, and almost nobody outside the sector talks about it. They stopped owning the buildings. Starting around 2013 with Penn National, then accelerating hard through the late 2010s, operators split the real estate away from the operations. They sold the physical casinos to real estate investment trusts, Vicky Properties and Gaming, and Leisure Properties, and leased them back on 30-year triple-net leases. Overnight, a casino company stopped being a landowner and became a tenant. Why do that? Because the market valued the same building differently depending on whose balance sheet it sat on. Inside a casino operator, that real estate got a casino multiple. Inside a REIT with a long lease and built-in rent escalators, it got a real estate multiple, and a much better one. Sell the building, take billions in cash, pay down debt, and the two pieces are worth more than the whole was. My friend Brandon called me in 2019 because he had a shot at putting money into a small casino deal in the Midwest through a guy he golfed with. He walked me through it on the phone, all excited. Revenue this, EBITDA that. I asked him one question. What's the rent? Long pause. He didn't know there was rent. He thought they owned it. That's the biggest thing that changed in this industry, and most retail investors have missed it completely. Buy shares in a lot of these operators today, and you're buying an enormous fixed obligation sitting on top of a revenue stream that is very much not fixed. Rent doesn't care that it's February. Rent doesn't care that a competitor opened 20 miles away. Rent doesn't care about a pandemic. It's operating leverage, beautiful and terrifying. When traffic is good, margins explode. Some of the best regional and Las Vegas locals operators run EBITDA margins north of 40%, which is absurd for a business that serves food. When traffic is bad, the same structure eats you alive. Now, the part I find most impressive, and most unsettling at the same time. My Aunt Marlene lives outside Kansas City. She's 71, goes to the same casino twice a month, plays penny slots, drinks Diet Coke, calls it a nice afternoon. She budgets $40 for it, the way you'd budget for a movie. Marlene gets mail from that casino. A lot of mail. Free play, buffet coupons, a birthday thing. A couple years ago, she had a hip replacement and didn't go for 3 months. And she got a letter that basically said, "We've missed you," with a better offer than she'd ever gotten. Something noticed. Not a person, a model. Her play frequency fell off a cliff. An algorithm flagged her as a churn risk, and her offer went up to win her back. That's not a casino. That's a subscription business doing retention marketing. This traces back to Gary Loveman, one of my favorite characters in American business. Loveman was a Harvard Business School professor who studied service operations, not a gambler. He wrote to Harrah's with some ideas, they hired him as a consultant, then COO, then he ran the whole company. And he did what nobody in that industry had done. He treated the customer database as the actual asset. Harrah's tracked play across every property, and when they dug in, their best customers weren't the high rollers in the suites. They were regular people playing slot machines. The Harvard case on it put something like 26% of customers at 82% of the revenue, mostly locals on machines, not whales flying in. Loveman was famous for saying 3 things would get you fired at Harrah's: stealing, harassment, and running an experiment without a control group. A casino CEO firing people over experimental design. I love it. So the industry stopped guessing. Which offer brings someone back? Which mailer works? What exact dollar amount of free play maximizes profit per visit? They reinvest a chunk of your theoretical loss back into you as comps, and the entire art is figuring out how small that chunk can be while keeping you coming. You're not being rewarded. You're being priced. Now, the other end of the customer pyramid, the whales. I met a host at a conference in Vegas once, guy named Kenny, whose entire job was managing relationships with about 40 people. 40. That was his book. Jets, restaurant tables, remembering which brand of water somebody's wife drinks. When I asked what the biggest risk in his job was, he didn't say losing a client. He said credit. Whales don't play with cash. They play on markers, which is casino credit. So a high-limit baccarat business is functionally an unsecured lending operation with international collections attached. You can win $8 million from someone on paper and spend 2 years in a pile of legal fees finding out what that $8 million is really worth. And the volatility is wild. Baccarat is high stakes and low edge, about 1%, which means over a single weekend, luck completely dominates math. Public gaming companies have missed earnings for exactly one reason: bad hold in baccarat. Not attendance, not costs, cards. Multi-billion-dollar companies explaining to Wall Street that they missed the quarter because a handful of extremely rich people got lucky. And sometimes the house genuinely gets beaten. In 2011, a guy named Don Johnson, who ran a horse racing analytics business, took roughly $15 million off 3 Atlantic City casinos. He didn't cheat, he negotiated. Post-crisis Atlantic City was desperate for high-end play, so he got them to agree to a 20% loss rebate plus favorable blackjack rules. He didn't beat the game, he beat the deal terms. That story should be taught in every negotiation class in America. Here's where I want to land this because there's one more piece and it changes the whole picture. Look at Las Vegas Strip revenue today, and gaming isn't the majority of it anymore. It's roughly a third. The rest is rooms, food, entertainment, retail, nightclubs, conventions. The Strip quietly turned into a hospitality business, with a casino attached instead of a casino with hotels attached. And they monetize all of it. Resort fees, close to pure margin, paid parking, which showed up in 2016 and caused a small local uprising. $18 to park somewhere that used to comp you a steak for showing up. Remember my $40 hotel room on that Corolla trip? That's the answer. The room was never the product. The room was customer acquisition cost. They were paying to have me in the building because the building is where the yield is. So, what is a casino? A casino is a machine that converts time into money at a known rate. That's the whole thing. The house edge isn't the business, it's the interest rate. Your time on the floor is the principal. Every free drink, every cheap room, every loyalty point, every "we've missed you" letter to my Aunt Marlene is one thing: an investment in extending the duration of the deposit. And once you see it that way, the modern industry makes sense. The smart operators worked out that the math and the database and the customer relationship are the real asset. The building is just where it happens. So they sold the buildings, kept the math, and went asset light. The ones who confused the two, who thought the answer was a taller tower with better glass, built the Revel and lost $2.5 billion finding out. I still go, by the way, once or twice a year. I set a number, I play blackjack because the edge is lowest, I lose it, and I go get a burger. I know exactly what's happening to me, and I do it anyway, and that's the most honest thing I can tell you about this business. Knowing the math doesn't make it beatable, and knowing you're the product doesn't stop it being a good Saturday. Just know what you're buying. You're not buying a chance. You're renting a seat. If this changed how you think about that free drink, hit subscribe, because next I'm breaking down the economics of airlines, the only industry I've found that's stranger than this one. And tell me in the comments, what's the most you've ever been up in a casino before you gave it back? Be honest. I'll go first. $600 and a free steak, and I'm still annoyed about it.